cover a new concept for classes called constructors. Okay. All right, so assume we have a class called rectangle with a public integer side A, another variable for side B, and another instance variable for area. Okay. We can create a method here, public void compute area, that all it does basically is it sets the area to side A times side B. That's the area of the rectangle, right, given the two sides. So let's say we have this class. I'm going to save this. I'm going to test this class. I'm going to create a new test rectangle class. Public class test rectangle. I'm going to have a main method here. Public static void main. Whenever you want to test something, you create a main method because that's actually a program that's going to be run. So in my main method, I'm going to create a rectangle variable, rectangle r equals new rectangle. And then I'm going to say r.side A, that was the variable that it had. You can go back and check. Side A equals, say, 9, and r.side B equals 10. And then what I will do is I will say r.compute area, and then I'm going to print system.out.println r.area. All right. Compile the, oops, need to save this. Save and compile. And run it. And I'll get the number 90 here, right? Because that's the area of the rectangle. So look, just to trace this, I create a new rectangle, right? So now R has all these variables in this method, and I can do with them whatever I want. So I'll set the first side, the second side, and then I'll call the method compute area. So side A is going to be 9, side B 10. Side A is going to be 9, side B 10, and then compute area will set this variable area here, which is the same as the global variable area, to side A times side B. That's what we just saw. Now, if I have to create several rectangles, it's kind of painful to go through all of them, setting the side A and side B, side A and side B. It would be much simpler, for example, if we could set the rectangle and create the rectangle all in one sitting. And that is when constructors come in. When you say new rectangle, open and close, what you're doing, okay, is you're calling a method called the constructor, because it's a special method. You're calling the constructor of the rectangle class. Okay? The constructor of a rectangle class, or any class, right, is a method that has no return type, and it is called exactly as the class. So to create the constructor here, for example, one could create it here. One could say public rectangle, open and close, and actually we could do something. So far, let's go to my test rectangle. When you do this new rectangle, all it does is it creates an instance of rectangle. But what if I want to have, say, for example, a default values here? So rectangle, open, close. I can set the default, so side A equals 10 and side B equals 10. Right? I could set those defaults, for example. Save the class. And in my test rectangle, I could not have those two things. If I compile it, if I create a new rectangle, notice that I have not set the sides. But what happens is it uses the default sides that I set in the constructor to compute the area. When I say new rectangle, what happens is side A gets set to 10 and side B gets set to 10 now. You see? Right here, when I said new rectangle, side A got set to 10 and side B got set to 10. I can always override them. If I retype side A equals 9 and side B equals 10, I will override those defaults. Okay? So if I compile and run, you'll see that I get 90 because I overrode those things. But say, for example, I set side A to 3 and I do not override side B. side B will be set to whatever was the default. Remember, new rectangle would set both sides to 10. But here I'm changing only side A to 3. So the area should be 3 times 10, which is 30. So let's compile it and run. 30. Okay, that's the area. Now, that's what you need to know about constructors. The constructor that we just saw is called the default constructor, okay, because it's what you would call a rectangle, right? However, you can create constructors that actually take in parameters here, And we can create a constructor that's much more powerful than the default and also allows us for a shortcut. In this constructor, I'm going to create a constructor that takes in two parameters, int A and int B. And inside this constructor, I'm going to set side A to A and side B to variable B. Okay? And so let's go back to our test rectangle class. Now, if I try to compile this, I'm going to get an error. It'll say cannot find symbol, constructor rectangle here. Because we don't have a default constructor anymore, we replaced it with a constructor that takes in two integer parameters. So let's use this constructor. Well, let's create a new rectangle of sides 9 and 10. Let's erase this row here. So we create rectangle R, rectangle 9, 10, two sides, and then we just say compute area. That should print 90, okay? Because new rectangle 9, 10 should call this constructor rectangle with the numbers 9 and 10 as B, and then those get set as the sides of the rectangle. So when I call compute area, I have the sides already set, therefore the area will compute. So again, rectangle 9, 10, and then I just call compute area. So let's compile and run, and this prints 90, which is the area of this rectangle. Okay, so in the rectangle you can have parameters to initialize the class. The purpose of the constructor is to do all the initializations of the class. If you want to, you can also initialize it with parameters. Okay, and you can go even beyond this, and you can say compute area. You can call a method within your class from the constructor. Okay, so if we save this, I don't even need this anymore, because the area, as soon as I create a new rectangle, it creates an instance of a rectangle with size 9, 10, and in the same constructor is going to also compute the area. So if I just compile it and run it, I get 90. That's the area. It's doing all in the initialization. This is much simpler. When I create several rectangles, this is a lot simpler to handle and to understand. There's a rectangle of size 9 and 10, and it already has the area set. Everything is done. Okay? So this is a good way to create classes, creating a constructor that actually initializes the class right away, simply, etc. Now, what if you don't know the sides of the rectangle when you create it because you want to ask the sides of the rectangle to the user, or who knows why? Okay, you can have it both ways. That's the main thing. You can create a rectangle constructor with A and B, or you can just create another constructor. It's called exactly the same without any parameters whatsoever, and it'll set defaults. For example, side A equals 10, side B equals 10. Oops. Now we have two constructors. The two methods are both public and they're both called the same, and they don't have a return type. You can have as many constructors as you want, and you can call each one. So you can call either one, I'm sorry. So for example, we have our rectangle here. Now let's create another rectangle. Let's create another rectangle. Rectangle R1 equals new rectangle. And if I say system.out.println r.area, in this when I create it like this, calling this constructor the default constructor, whoops, I'm sorry, r1.area. If I run it, I'll have 90, which is coming from this first print area, and then 0, because the area hasn't even been computed yet. I have to call compute area. So I'll do r1.compute area, compile. What should I get here? Well, I should get a 100, because in the new rectangle here, just the default constructor, look, default constructor, I'm setting the sides 10 and 10. So if I compute the area over here, I'll get 100 in the area, right? So compile, run, I get 100. And if I want to get the area of a different rectangle, of a different set of sides, I would have to do side A equals, I don't know, 8, and R1.side B equals 10. I'll compile it and run it. And now I get 80 as the area of the second rectangle. So if for some reason I don't want to set the size or don't want to initialize the object right away, I can still create like an empty or a default rectangle, right? Here I'm creating a custom rectangle right off the bat. Here I'm creating a default rectangle right off the bat, and I am changing it and doing stuff with it in the meantime. The idea here, the main point here being constructors. Default constructor, you can have anything that you want here, and nothing is also allowed. You can just have open and close curly braces. And you can also have a custom constructor with some parameters.